Okay, so you're here because you want to get a real handle on these big, complex global stories, but you want it fast, right?
Exactly. Time's valuable.
Totally. And lately, one thing keeps popping up again and again. Military coups in Africa. It feels like, we barely process one and then boom, another happens.
It does feel that way.
Since just 2020, we've had Mali twice,
Yeah.
then Chad, Guinea, Sudan, Burkina Faso, and most recently, Niger.
Yeah, the list has gotten pretty long pretty quickly.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. Let's try to cut through the noise, get past the headlines, and really understand what's driving these power grabs and maybe what it all means for the continent.
Absolutely. It's a trend that definitely needs a closer look. This recent cluster, I mean, 7 coups in just a few years, that's significant.
For sure.
And when you dig into the immediate reasons given, the justifications from the coup leaders themselves, you start seeing patterns in the sources we looked at. Well, things like major economic problems, deep-rooted corruption, and governments just failing to provide basic security. Especially, with those jihadist insurgencies spreading in the Sahel. That comes up a lot.
Right, and these aren't just abstract concepts, are they? They have real-world consequences. Take Mali back in 2020. Colonel Goita didn't just wake up one day and decide to take over. Our sources are pretty clear. It happened after huge public protests. People were fed up.
Fed up with corruption, fed up with the government, seemingly unable to stop the violence up north.
Exactly. And then jump forward to Niger, just last year, 2023.
Similar story, different place.
Yeah, General Chiani overthrows President Bazoum, and what does he cite? Governance failures. It's this recurring theme, isn't it? This deep dissatisfaction.
It really suggests a major disconnect between the people in power and, well, large parts of the population and the military itself.
It's like one analysis described it as a thunderstorm brewing. All this discontent builds up pressure, quietly maybe, then suddenly, bang, the storm hits.
That's a good analogy. Captures the suddenness after the buildup.
But it makes you wonder, though, is this recent spike something totally new? Or are we seeing, like, history repeating itself?
That's such a crucial question. And if you zoom out, look at the bigger picture, you absolutely see parallels. Think back to the 1960s.
The post-independence era.
Exactly. Newly independent African states, a lot of political change, and yes, quite a few military coups back then too. Nigeria in '66, Ghana the same year. It was a turbulent time.
Okay, so not entirely new then. What were the issues back then that might still be relevant now? What are the sort of underlying currents?
Well, several things keep cropping up in the analysis, both then and now. First, democratic institutions were often pretty new, pretty fragile. They hadn't really sunk deep roots yet.
Makes sense.
Second, you can't ignore the colonial legacy. The armies left behind were often designed by the colonial powers, mainly to keep control, not necessarily to protect a democracy.
Right, trained for internal order, not external defense or supporting civilian rule.
Precisely. And third, a really persistent factor, economic inequality, sometimes extreme inequality. That's always been a source of instability.
You can see how those early conditions might create vulnerabilities that just linger. And looking at specific countries, like Burkina Faso, you see these really long histories of instability.
Absolutely. Thomas Sankaра's coup in '83 initially, some saw it as this revolutionary moment, right? A break from the past.
Yeah, he had these big ideals.
He did. But then his assassination, only 4 years later, that kicked off more instability, which you could argue kind of paved the way, eventually, for the coup we saw in 2022.
So even attempts at radical change can sometimes just lead to more disruption down the road.
It's a potential unintended consequence, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's not just a West Africa thing either. Look at Egypt in 2013.
General Sisi removing President Morsi.
Right. And again, you see the military positioning itself as the quote-unquote savior, stepping in when politics gets messy and divided.
This narrative keeps coming back to the military as the only ones who can guarantee stability when things fall apart.
It does. And that forces us to ask a really fundamental question here, based on what we're seeing in the sources. Are these militaries genuinely acting like protectors, stepping in only in real crisis? Or are they maybe more like opportunistic predators, just grabbing power when they see a chance?
Feared protectors or opportunistic predators. That's a stark way to put it.
It's the core tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the answer is probably complicated, varies case by case.
Probably. But we also can't just look inside these countries, can we? What about outside influences, external powers?
Oh, absolutely critical. You have to factor in the role of external players. It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Like who?
Well, You've got France's long, complicated history in the Sahel, where recently you see Russia's Wagner group showing up, particularly in Mali.
Right.
And even actions that seem helpful, like, say, the U.S. providing military training. Well, there could be unintended side effects.
How so?
Some reports indicate that leaders involved in Mali's coups had actually received U.S. training.
Wow. So efforts meant to help stabilize could actually inadvertently be equipping the people who later destabilize things. That's sobering.
It is. And internally, beyond just weak governance, what else keeps coming up in the sources?
Well, corruption is a big one. Not just petty corruption, but like systemic stuff in governments. And related to that, often, is the feeling that elections are rigged or fraudulent.
That fuels so much public anger, doesn't it? It creates cynicism, makes people feel like the system is stacked against them.
Totally. And then there's the demographic factor. You mentioned the UN data point. Something like 60% of Africa's population is under 25.
That's right, a huge youth bulge. And when you have masses of young people without jobs, without opportunities.
Feel left out, disenfranchised.
Exactly. They see the existing system, the political class, as failing them. That creates fertile ground for change, sometimes drastic change.
The coup in Sudan in 2021 seems to bring a lot of this together, doesn't it? General al-Burhan stopping that fragile democratic transition.
It really does. You had the economic hardship, you had reports of foreign meddling, and you had this political process just stalling out.
And connecting back to external influence, it kind of echoes the Cold War era, right? When the U.S. and Soviet Union would back military regimes just for strategic advantage?
Yeah, the players might be different now, the justifications might be framed differently, but that pattern of external powers getting involved for their own reasons, sometimes propping up undemocratic regimes, it hasn't entirely gone away.
So it leads to this this hypothesis, really. Unless things change significantly, like much better civilian governance and less foreign interference, this cycle of coups might just keep going.
That seems to be a strong possibility highlighted in the analyses, yes.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question. How do you stop it? Can this cycle actually be broken? What needs to happen?
Well, there are potential avenues. Regional bodies like ECOWAS in West Africa or the African Union continent-wide, they could play a bigger role.
Like stricter sanctions.
Stricter sanctions, yes, consistently applied. But also more actively promoting democratic norms, supporting institutions, maybe mediating more effectively before things reach a boiling point.
And what about pressure from within, from the people themselves?
That's potentially huge. We're seeing more youth activism, people organizing online. Think about those recent Gen Z protests in Kenya. Okay, different context, but it shows how young people can mobilize and challenge the status quo, challenge powerful interests.
So maybe a new generation demanding more accountability.
It's definitely a potential counterforce to military dominance, a sign of hope, perhaps.
It's interesting, too, that some sources point to Ghana as a success story, relatively speaking. No coups there since 1981. What's different about Ghana?
Ghana's often held up as an example where democratic institutions have gradually become stronger, more respected, more resilient over decades. The rule of law seems more embedded.
So it suggests that building those strong institutions, even if it takes time, is key for long-term stability.
That seems to be the lesson, yes. It's not a quick fix, but it's crucial.
Okay, so let's project forward a bit. Imagine Burkina Faso, say, in 2030. Based on everything we've discussed, what are some possible futures? Could go different ways.
Absolutely. You could maybe see a scenario where another coup attempt happens, but this time it's met with massive street protests.
Backed up by strong action from ECOWAS and the AU.
Exactly. International pressure mounts, the coup fails, and it actually forces real democratic reforms. A strengthening of civilian rule, that's one possibility.
The optimistic path.
The optimistic path. But then there's the other side, a scenario where military rule becomes more normal, almost entrenched, not just in Burkina Faso, but across the Sahel.
Like a domino effect.
Sort of. Repeated coups, maybe counter-coups. Constant instability hindering any real progress on development or security. A much bleaker picture.
Yeah. It really throws that basic contradiction into sharp relief, doesn't it? If the military solution is always grabbing power, looking backward in a way, how does the continent actually move forward?
It's the fundamental dilemma. And looking even further ahead, maybe 2035, what's the outlook for coups across Africa more broadly?
Any predictions based on the trends?
Well, it's tough, obviously. But you could argue maybe coups decrease if these youth movements for democracy really take hold, and if regional bodies get tougher and more effective. But if economic inequality keeps getting worse, if external actors keep meddling and destabilizing, then you could just as easily see more military interventions. It really feels like it could tip either way.
So wrapping this deep dive up then, it's clear there's no single, simple answer to why these coups happen. It's this complex mix, right? Weak governance, corruption, external interference, old and new, and this huge young population that needs change.
A volatile mix of factors.
Definitely. And maybe the biggest question we leave you, the listener, with is this. Thinking about all these deep-rooted problems, are the militaries stepping in ultimately the core problem here? Or is it possible, even conceivable, that sometimes under specific terrible circumstances, they could be part of a necessary, if temporary, solution?
It's a really uncomfortable question.
It is. No easy answers there, but definitely something worth mulling over as we watch how things develop across the continent.